We, being part of that community kind of as it's happening, we have a certain perspective. You don't necessarily need to agree with it. We're not going to say that like this is gospel truth necessarily. But we do have some experience that will lean, that'll help our views to kind of give a more representative view.
You've both been involved in the Brony community.
And you're writing a book.
I'll talk about that later, but I guess for people who don't know us, we actually host a podcast called the Zootopia Minute.
Yes.
So we've been doing a podcast where we just kind of riff on the movie Zootopia, but before recording and after recording, we sometimes have the most fun when we kind of do ad-libbed off-topic discussions, because we both know a lot on different topics, so having us discuss these topics are very fun. So we thought this year we'll try a different type of panel. And actually, before we begin, we should probably toast to that.
Yes,
cheers.
indeed. If you don't have a drink yet, there is a bar in the back. Go ahead. You can purchase these fine mugs at Chaco's booth.
Brony
They say
mugs.
Brony tears on them. Yeah.
Tastes salty.
Yeah. So, if you guys have seen us around the con, Simul here, why don't you introduce yourself?
So my name is Simul. I am a cosplayer and just a nerd in general. You may recognize me because sometimes I look a little bit different at this con and I have something of a different job. I think the picture kind of speaks more to it.
And you guys have probably seen me in the vendor hall where I have all these flags, tarot cards, and a lot of swag, which you guys could purchase at my booth at 114. And I'm also writing a history book on the history of fan conventions, which is where this actually helps into this panel, because I've been researching the history of how fandoms kind of got started, not just from the Victorian era, but all the way to ancient times, and kind of analyzing and looking at different fandoms, like the Star Wars fandom, Star Trek, furry fandom, and My Little Pony fandom. You can see that these kind of shifts go through waves and stuff. But if you're interested in learning more about my book, you can feel free to check out my Kickstarter. I also had some postcards and freebies outside, including these little ribbons you guys got to your badges for the new book. And if you guys are also interested in following our podcast, make sure to follow us at Zootopia Minute. We are on Twitter, Gmail, Tumblr, and YouTube at Zootopia Minute, so feel free to follow us on there.
Real important, we're not furries.
Yes, we are not.
I just want that to be like really clear. No, listen, we're not.
We've had some, we have Zoosonas. Zoosonas are different than furries.
Zoosonas are not fursunas, okay? They're completely different. Go listen to our podcast and you'll find out all about that.
Where's AC Bus?
Well, let's get off furries for a bit, because furries have nothing to do with bronies, because we were talking about the Brony history panel. And before we could even start the foundation of what the fandom's all about, this is where my expertise as a historian comes into play. In case you guys don't know, I actually studied at Johns Hopkins University, where I studied psychology, human genetics, and also studying brain surgery under a certain person named Dr. Ben Carson, who tried to run for president but kind of went crazy. So we're not going to talk about him right now. But I do have a little bit of knowledge in the history of how I guess culture and art has kind of come to play in the modern day. And to lay the foundation for what is now known as Brony fandom, we have to talk about a period called the Animation Renaissance. I'm going to quickly plug it. So the Animation Renaissance, some say started with the Disney Animation Renaissance, which started with Little Mermaid, moving forward, and there's also the television cartoon renaissance, which most people say started with John Kay when he created Ren and Stimpy, which was a harken back to the golden age of animation and stuff. After around 2004-2005, there was a period called, there's no official name, I call it the animation recession in my book, but there's a period where animation became more reliant on flash, away from the traditional hand-drawn stuff. It became more corporate, more about trying to make money, and that was kind of the period that most of us grew up in. Most bronies are millennials. Most of us grew up having our childhood rooted in the animation renaissance, and then as we were coming into college, out of high school, into the job market, not only did our country hit a recession, culture in the animation industry also kind of hit a low point. But one individual figure who was very influential in and prominent in these fields of animation was Lawrence Mouse, who of course you guys know, worked on Powerpuff Girls, Iron Giant, Cats Don't Dance, Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends.
Cats Don't Dance, right? Yes.
Yes.
Anyone remember that movie?
Yeah.
I love that movie so much. It's been a while since I've seen it.
So, and I'm sure you guys know the story of Lauren Faust had an idea for her own show and toys line called Galaxy Girls. She pitched it to Hasbro. Hasbro said, "We'll think about it." But hey, we were thinking about doing a reboot of My Little Pony. Can you see what you could work with? She kind of ran with the concept, took the G1 character she grew up with, and instead of looking at the canon of the original show, she wanted to show these characters as how she was playing with them as a kid.
Yeah, in her own childhood, it was a reflection of that.
Instead of having tea parties and whatnot, they were having action-packed adventures.
If you've seen the Bronycon documentary from Bronycon 2012, there's a cool little animation that goes along with that whole story of her telling how her childhood vision of the pony world got translated into the show that we now have today.
Yep. And around this time, most people, because like I said, most bronies, using my psychological background, I don't want to shoehorn everyone to the same field, but most millennials during a certain period, especially coming into a horrible job market with all these student debts or just coming into college, there is a peak period where there's a lot of emotional trauma, and most people are a little bit more on the depressed side or, I guess, suicidal side. So what helps with people going through these types of core life crises are nostalgic things from childhood. And when people saw, hey, Lauren Faust is doing a reboot of My Little Pony, My Little Pony didn't really even come into the thing. They said, hey, this is the person who worked on my childhood shows, worked on some of the best movies like Cats and Dance and Giant, and she's going to be rebooting things. So 4chan was one of the sites that kind of looked at what she was doing, and then there was that article on Cartoon Crew.
Yes.
Strangely, in the period where Seth MacFarlane shows dominated and Johnny Test, the one show he decided to criticize was one written by one of the masters of the animation renaissance before it even aired yet. But
by the way, who actually enjoys like Seth MacFarlane stuff? And you're wrong.
Yeah. Anyways, when that article was
the older stuff is better. That is true.
When that article was posted, 4chan kind of was like, hey, this is not cool. He's preemptively jumping on this. Let's kind of support the show. And this is kind of where the birth of My Little Pony got started. So on the 4chan threads, a lot of people were posting, hey, don't listen to all these negative things. Let's try to give the show a chance. It's made by someone who has a lot of artistic talent, a lot of, so this show might have some promise. And when the first episode aired, I think one of the most famous scenes was one of the background characters with derp eyes. We affectionately call her Derpy Hooves now, was kind of posted and became kind of the pseudo mascot of this early iteration of people slowly liking this show in first episodes. And this is where we get into the wilderness years of the My Little Pony fandom. So there's no official chronological divisions of Brony history, but every time I write history books, whether it's military academy histories or convention histories, you have to find it helpful by finding demarcation points to divide histories. So I'm going to divide history of the Brony fandom into periods where one organization was the most influential and one type of content creator was influential in the fandom. So in this early period, it was the artists and Equestria Daily, which were kind of the dominating force.
So it's funny because you're saying there is no official demarcation for that, but here's the thing. It's not like as history is happening, everyone's like, and now the golden age begins. Yeah. That all comes afterwards, right?
Yep.
And so the people that figure out those labels are the people that write the history books. You're the first person writing a history book on the history of this fandom. That means you get to decide that. No one here better start writing a book and publish it first. We're coming after you.
Yeah.
Seriously.
No, that's actually what happened when I wrote the military history book, because no one...
You know what? This is too risky. Panel canceled.
Do that. Yeah. But anyway, so this was really the wilderness years. People were trying to find certain things, and what was fantastic was how fast this fandom exploded. Within a year, the first pony meetup, within actually the first half year, first pony meetups, which eventually evolved to the first cons, and I think we'll talk about that a bit because you might have some...
Yes. Well, I want to talk about this 4chan stuff.
Yeah, let's talk about it. Okay, so 4chan, the Derby picture was kind of used as the mascot and started getting people on, and
does anyone remember which episode was the first time was that?
It was the very first episode.
Like part 1 or part 2?
Part 1.
Yeah.
Because people were also, like I said, people were preemptively saying, hey, this article was really shitty, so let's try to at least support the show beforehand. And that's actually where 4chan is where the term Brony was coined.
Yes, but okay, so pardon. My friend, who was one of the founders of Everfree Northwest. Anyone been to Everfree Northwest here? Yeah. Bajati, some of you might know that name. I was at a party with him back in Seattle recently, and he was kind of, we were like just sitting in a tent, like at this party, and everyone was like really drunk, and we're just talking about like early Brony history stuff because it was super nostalgic. And he brought up like, he was sort of involved in this early 4chan stuff, and he's like, yeah, like, so for instance, the first time it really kind of appeared on 4chan, you mentioned that article, right? It was a negative article saying like, this is the end of story-driven media, or something along those lines.
It's like someone saying Citizen Kane would be the end of artistic
I know,
cinema.
and think of the iron, where is that author now, and do they realize how wrong they were? Really?
I actually have been trying to interview him for a book about that.
I want to know where they're at now, if maybe they're just embarrassed about that whole thing. Because what happened is, that article got put on 4chan, and it was like, what do you guys think of this article? People started watching this show and saying, actually, you know, this isn't half bad, right? I mean, we came here to make fun of it, but honestly, this is all right. And my friend was telling me about the early days on 4chan. There were two main places of discussion. There was Co, the cartoon board, and there was B, random, right? The infamous B. And I don't know how accurate this is, but what he told me is that there was a division between Co and B over who was kind of trying to like dominate the discussion, and it was Co was the Colts and B was the Bronies.
Yeah.
And that's where that came
And Bronies came, so there was actually one tweet where someone was asking for a gift from a certain episode, and one of the posters was like, thanks,
Gotcha, thanks Pony Bro.
He's like,
more like Brony, am I right?
That's how the term Brony stuck.
If you can, we don't have that screenshot.
No, we don't.
Do?
I tried to find it, but
where are you, Anon 469730, whatever?
Thank you for coining this term.
How cool would it be if like someone just stood up right now and was like, I was the original.
So that's also where. So if you guys know Purple Tinker, she created what's kind of known as the first pony convention, so that's contested. But she founded what is Bronycon, and she took the term that was used for the fandom, Bronies, and founded Bronycon. And of course, this is Bronycon after how many years in existence? Of course, Bronycon has changed hands many times. But you working for Everfree, and I actually was just looking at the Everfree Twitter, and they say in their profile, the longest 3-day running Brony convention.
It's so okay. I want to set the record straight here, and I'm in a very interesting position because I do work. So I'm actually the vice chair of Everfree for 2019. But I've worked for Bronycon for many years too, doing the mascot thing, and it puts me in an interesting place where like I don't know which con to root for more. You know, there's a great photo from 2015, which is the first year that I was a mascot here, and Everfree had a booth. And Bajati was there, and he has a photo of me in my Hoofbeats outfit sitting behind the Everfree booth, like this, and he sent it to Josh Dean like, he's defected. He's come over to our side. But yeah, so to clear that up, here's the thing, Everfree Northwest, and this I do agree with, I love both cons, they're both fantastic events. Everfree Northwest was the first event that was conceived as a full-blown 3-day My Little Pony convention. The first Bronycons, the earliest Bronycons, you had something like between 100 and 300 attendees, and it was multiple events a year. And it was less of a convention like this in a convention center or a hotel, and it was more of a large scale meetup. What people will generally say is like the first real Bronycon was Summer Bronycon 2012, which is the one in Secaucus, the one that the documentary was made about. And
the one that caught on
I
fire.
know the con can't, so Bronycon can't even argue that they did start sooner because they did their 5th anniversary. And if you count back from when they branded the year as the 5th anniversary, that means that Summer Bronycon 2012 was their first one. So gotcha. Gotcha.
All right. Well, we're going to quickly try and move forward, but I'm going to quickly, as this historian side of me, is going to quickly summarize the characteristic of the culture in this time period. So the big thing was contrasting the idea of a really girly kid show with more adult ideas and content. So mostly there was a mashup between something that was cutely cartoony, but with adult characteristics. And that's where we got a lot of the crazy flash animations like
Pony.mo.
Max Gilardi's Apple.Moo and Mr. Davies' Cupcakes. We saw a lot of things that were kind of doing the crude type of humor with the show that was also exemplified in fan fiction. So you would have things that dealt with more harsh real world things that could not occur in the pony world, like Fall Equestria on one scale, or more realistic life depictions like Milo Dashi on the other end of the scale.
I've never read Milo Dashi.
Yeah, is Alex here by the way?
You'll cry every time.
The only famous fanfics I've read are Cupcakes.
Yeah, so and that goes another example. Cupcakes and Rainbow Factory. The idea of taking ideas that should not match up was something that was really exemplified in this area. Also, the idea of memes, because memes are really big in 4chan, like board culture.
What's a meme?
A meme?
What's a meme?
So memes like you guys probably do like bananas and to the moon type things for constantly popping up there.
Bananas.
Alright. So Equestria Daily and specifically Sophisto kind of became the de facto figurehead of the fandom during this period. Specifically, Equestria Daily was important because it was the first active site to collect all these different fan art and fan fiction, and being plugged or featured on Equestria Daily was very, very important because if your fan fiction was plugged, that's actually how Equestria Daily, Fall Equestria got really, really big. Things that were plugged there automatically got noticed. So sites like this were very, very important. That moves to the next era where people started saying, well, Equestria Daily can do this. Let's try to create our own content gathering site. And we moved to the next period of the
Tumblr
history. And I would say this is the formation years and
hold on. Is that mostly, I can't tell, is that groans I'm hearing here? We have some mixed feelings.
So this is a period where I like to use Everfree Network and their owner Final Draft as kind of the figureheads, the de facto figureheads of these period. And unlike Sophisto and Equestria Daily that just kind of fell into that role, Everfree Network was specifically formed by Final Draft to try to be a professional. That's also another meaning of a professional content. Organizer.
Did you just say being a professional brony is a meme?
Remember that period where whenever
the thing is, I've never heard it put that way, but you're right.
Yeah.
You're right, and we've been over this before. We'll get more into this.
So this period is kind of professionalizing a fandom. And characteristics you'll see from this area is the first inklings of horse fame. So people realizing they can become more notable within this field than outside in the real world. So someone might be a military officer or a doctor in the outside world, but hey, I could be a famous musician or artist within the pony fandom. So the idea of, in the previous period, it was a balance between their normal everyday lives and the fandom. Now it's a more, let's move out of our real day lives and into this secluded fandom and try to carve a name for ourselves out there. And this is also what's known as a golden period of Tumblr Pod. Tumblr Pod.
Is it pawn or poem?
Poem or pod? And we have Fisher over there
Who says pawn?
Wait, who says Tumblr Pod?
Who says pwn?
All right,
I guess.
Okay, so
You're wrong. You just got proof.
I did the Tumblr podcast, so I could say whatever I want. But anyway, so big blogs around this time were Rise, My Little Blobs, or the Chubbies, JJ's, Princess Molestia was really big, of course. Max Gilardi was also, along with his animations, did the Japanese.
That's Hot Diggity Demon, by the way. If you don't know that.
Hot Diggity Demon. Will Draw for Foods was doing As the Prize, and these were kind of the early big Tumblr blogs, and this is where a lot of people got known. In fact, that's actually where I started Chocolate Pony, my Chocolate Pony blog, and most people still know me through my Chocolate Pony art, even though I have not done that blog in over like 5 years or so. But as opposed to the previous era where artists were kind of the big content creators, the ones who were invited to cons as guests and stuff, this is a period that shifted to where musicians became the big dominating content creator, which is very, very unique because at most different conventions, so science fiction conventions and furry conventions and whatnot, it's normally the artists who are invited as their guest of honor or community guests. And the Brony fandom was really one of the first where it was musicians who were trying to trade on equal level or even higher, which is unique because while us artists, we could kind of pay for a trip here, vending and selling and making things back. Most musicians can't really make enough, even if they have a table similar to these, to come to these cons. So the idea of bringing them as a guest with comped rooms and fares was very, very good. Of course, headlining concerts and whatnot, like Bronypalooza here.
Yeah. Speaking of just horse fame in general, and saying, like, yeah, musicians are a good example here because, you know, by day you have your day job or whatever, you go to the con and suddenly everyone knows you. Does anyone remember that Sherlock Holmes parody of At the Gala, but it was at the convention? And it was like, feeling like an A-lister here at the convention. That's very much true. It's the more genericized term when you apply it to fandom in general is big name fan or BNF. The equivalent term in like the furry fandom would be your popular. Don't ask me why I know that. I'm not a furry. I'm not a furry. I have many friends who are furries, and they are fine, upstanding members of society.
Alright. Well, the other thing that was really, one of the other notable characteristics of this period was the idea of cringe culture, finding things that were really awkward and cringy, which could be a good or bad thing, but because the fandom was very unique. So Lauren Faust created My Little Pony so it could appeal to a broad range of people, but most of the people who do come to more fandom events are people who in the outside world don't seem to fit in, so they could fit in a convention scene or small forums and stuff. Yeah. So that will also attract people who are slightly more socially awkward. And this is where we do get things that started making other fans a little uncomfortable. So of course we had things like the Lyra plushie, Kevin
Someone made me a horn cozy.
Yeah, or what was it? Kevin Sano getting that letter from the guy who said he married Twilight. Twilight was his wife, and yeah, not to step off that. And this was also a dangerous period because, like I said, people were trying to carve a name for themselves, try to professionalize a fandom, and become famous or recognized in this. And that's where we get into a lot of tricky waters, because along with Everfree Network, a vast majority of different networks. Derby News was one of the first originals. I think it was even formed before Equestria Daily. But then that's also where we had Ponyville, like Ponyville Live, Celestia Radio, a lot of similar networks trying to gather. And this is a period also where Brony shows and podcasts were really, really big and popular. Of course, you guys might know Chef Sandy and Outsiders, Bronyville podcast, Pager Sisters, there's Dusty Cat's podcast. So podcasters were really, really big along this time period.
Coming to an end around the same time, and so maybe it kind of fits more in the previous era, but does anyone remember SyncTube? Yeah, so SyncTube was a service, it doesn't exist anymore, which is real sad, but it was a really cool, nifty service where you would create a server basically, and then you'd send a link to that server to other people and they could join it, and what it was is you could queue up YouTube videos and it would make sure that when someone hit play, it would play for everybody and pause for everybody and all that, and everyone would stay in sync. And there were a number of different channels, really popular Brony channels on SyncTube that would just do streams of episodes, and they would do like full season marathons up to like the new season. Like Philly was a very popular one. My friend Bajandi was heavily involved in that. And so I guess it just harkens back to, again, while we've seen this kind of permeate into the real world, if you want to call it that, it all has its beginnings on these very niche kind of online communities. But it's expanded so much, because I mean, like, how many people here actually go on 4chan a lot? It's okay, you're among friends here. Yeah. See, so there are plenty, but like, it's not the majority, right? Yeah. Even though the fandoms kind of began there, there's people that are bronies here that like have nothing to do with 4chan.
Oh, I think that's also another important thing to add is Ponychan was when the bronies were kind of banned from 4chan.
Right.
Ponychan was created, and when they were invited back, that's when
/MLP is now a thing.
Some people still want to remain with Ponychan, so we kind of had those two divisions.
Yeah. We're going to have like open mic near the end. Is it quick? Yeah. Of course I know about Berry too. Yeah, they kind of unofficially show up at cons and have like entire floors of the con hotels kind of dedicated to them. You don't hear about that, but oftentimes the con itself will contract with the hotel to make sure all the Buried Two people get put on one floor. And then the staff floor, where all the staff stay, is between that and the rest of the hotel, so there's a buffer floor for noise from the Buried Two floor. That's a common thing that happens.
Now talking about the dangers of these individuals trying to professionalize or find a market or income from these things, are people coming in without actually experiences in certain areas. And that's actually one of the criticisms I got when I was running for a con chair of a certain con. I laid out, there's a difference between trying to run a small event with a group of friends or actually running a larger event and having the right people in certain volunteer positions or certain paid positions. And one of the good examples of this was Las Pegasus Unicon from two ways, because they're trying to make money marketing off a certain thing, and the other thing is they were just not ready to do this. And around this time you saw pony cons kind of explode on the scene, and when you check out my convention history book, this is very unique. There is no other fandom aside from Star Trek that had such a big footprint within the convention scene. Even larger fandoms like Harry Potter and Doctor Who did not have as many conventions as My Little Pony did at its heyday. In fact, around 2013, 2014, there was almost 50 pony conventions within the United States alone, which is really crazy.
There was a con bubble.
Every single major metropolitan area had like 3 PonyCons within that same area. So you had a lot of people, and a lot of these people, again, never ran cons before. So these are people like high school kids who are just trying to form these things and then getting way over their head. So one of the good things that happened was after, so there seemed to be some divisions within the fandom and the idea that there was a Brony Illuminati controlling it and different groups fighting, like Derpy News, Slash MOP, Equestria Daily, and Everfree Network were all kind of fighting for control of the fandom. What happened was, which I thought was actually really beautiful, when Unicon was slowly collapsing as it was, all these different sections of the Brony fandom, which normally would kind of sling mud at each other, kind of united for that fundraising charity to make sure that the VAs and guests were paid, and that all the other attendees who were stranded were at least able to pay for an extra night or get back home in time. So this was really, really good. And it kind of showed this period where the idea of, okay, we have to rein in doing these cons. In fact, not just the pony convention scene, almost every other convention, from the anime, comic, and sci-fi conventions, started becoming more careful and started instituting rules to prevent something like Unicon happening. Now, the end of this period, I would say, is kind of where Everfree Network kind of stopped operating. And specifically, one notable event was, this was also a period where it was kind of the first stretch without Lauren Faust as the creator of the show. And since stepping down from her position, she didn't really give too many interviews. And the first interview she really won, a Q&A session she offered to take, was on 4chan, which I think is very appropriate considering how the fandom was born on 4chan. Final Draft and Everfree Network offered, hey, let's have a more family-friendly network to conduct this Q&A session over. And Faust was like, no, I'm a big girl, I can handle myself. And I think that was kind of the
famous last word.
I think really the first arrow that kind of took relevance out of large networks like Everfree. And then
Everfree Network.
Yeah, it moved to the next period, which I would say is things that are slowly becoming grandfathered in and solidifying. So it's a solidification period.
So just on EFN real quick, it's so funny because I remember when EFN was, it was EFR first, right? Everfree Radio, and then it was EFN. And that kind of bugged me because it's like, people are going to get us confused with Everfree Northwest, right? You gotta add the W to the end of it. But still though, if you Google, like, sometimes I'll just Google Everfree Northwest or EFNW to see like how we're doing with our online image. And if you do Google images, you'll get stuff from the con, but then you'll get this one particular Cessna 172 that's registration number has EFNW in it. Like if someone could try Googling that right now, you'll find a plane. Like there's a specific airplane that has it. It's ridiculous. But yeah, now they're out of the picture now.
So this period, I guess the main group that was in control was specifically the what's known as the modern incarnation of Bronycon, specifically the Lunar Solace Corporation Bronycon, which was, I think, organized by Josh Dean. So I would say he was the de facto figurehead of this period, and kind of Bronycon has always been the de facto figurehead, being really the only interlude between the fandom and has.
Yeah, you found the plane, right? Yeah.
So during this period, basically this was after the period where people realized, oh, we can't just start cons and stuff, and we just can't start radio networks and whatnot. So basically, this was the solidification phase. Anyone that survived the previous era kind of slowly started to dominate that certain area. So no new conventions were really founded, but the ones that were still surviving after this mass change were kind of the ones that were solidifying themselves. This was also the period within the show where M.A. Larson was really making a name for himself, and at first when people thought, hey, Lauren Faust could not be replaced, M.A. Larson kind of shows up, embraced the fandom, was embraced by the fandom, and kind of became a living meme, signing things, and of course most famously giving Twilight alicorn wings, which became a meme unto itself.
Yeah. Does anyone remember? I don't know why I'm thinking of this now. There was a meme from around that time where it was like a piece of merchandise that was a pair of briefs, like underwear, with Rainbow Dash's face on it. And the caption was, they're making Rainbow Dash and Alicorn 2 now.
Alright, and the other thing was, this was also a period, at the first two periods, the media and news and other outside groups kind of looked at the fandom as kind of this weird oddity, and they were trying to make fun of it a bit. And then they realized, hey, okay, these people are genuine, and let's try to embrace it. During this period was when the Brony fandom kind of became referenced a lot in pop culture. So a lot of cartoon strips was referencing it. Of course, one more famous one was the Bob's Burgers episode where they went to Equestricon, where they were all they're called
the Equesticles.
Yes.
Yeah.
And of course, most people thought that
because they got testicles.
The leader of the Equesticles,
the weird, like mean, like queen bee guy.
Yeah,
I don't remember.
Most people thought Final Draft, the guy from the previous era, was that guy, and that was a joke that this guy was based off Final Draft. Now, as opposed to the previous era where it was the artists and musicians who were the kind of the main headliners, this is the period where vlogging became much bigger. So as opposed to podcasting, the idea of doing an analysis show on YouTube really, really became big. And vloggers became kind of the big name guests who were always being invited to these different conventions.
I like how your example analysis video is the one that's like a parody of analysis.
I did not, because we were friends with so many vloggers, I didn't want to single one out, so I was like, I'll just
I'm gonna call out every analysis person right now though. Find another way to format your videos that's not your OC in the corner with like the video in the opposite corner. Just saying, it's like, they're all the same.
And this is kind of also coming back from the Tumblr Pwn community. This is where Tumblr, the golden age of Tumblr kind of ended, and most of the big names in the Tumblr blogging community.
Like you.
Yes, like me. This was the period I left. This is the demarcation line when chocolate ponies stopped updating. But more specifically, within the Tumblr sphere, this is where the Steven Universe fandom started taking hold. And also, this is where the idea of the social justice dominated Tumblr became big, so Tumblr started shifting to more and more drama, which the pony fandom was sometimes involved in, but did not want to be involved with itself. Of course, Pinky Pony was one of the good examples of that. But
Tumblr ruined Steven Universe.
So this is where unintentional.
I can't watch it because. Okay. Here's my advice. I have Tumblr. I love Tumblr. Don't get a Tumblr. It's a terrible place. Just avoid it at all costs.
So this was a period where like drama was exploding, but it wasn't intentional drama. This wasn't manufactured drama. It was just finding a hole in sites like Tumblr, 4chan, and whatnot. Of course, this was also the period around where Gamergate was really at its height as well. But most people around this period were basically the ones who kind of left. A lot of the big musicians and artists kind of slowly started branching away, saying, I want to do more than ponies. So basically, this is the remnants of the previous periods. But this is also where a lot of new things were tested. Like, of course, that's where Twilight Sparkle Pacific game got started. A lot of fun things got started. This period was a solidification phase from the previous two periods, and that moves us to the modern period, which we could say was kind of dominated by Horse News as the main unofficial figurehead of the fandom at this point. Specifically now that Brony drama from the previous period was starting to boil up. This was a site where, hey, we could actually report on and make something out of all this crazy drama. And of course, from this point forward, most people were saying, no, the Brony fandom's dying, the Brony fandom's dying. This was a period after Equestria Girls was released, and they're doing all these new Equestria Girls shows. This is when the new replacements for Twilight came about, like Sunset Shimmer and Starlight Glimmer, and the new young 6 characters from the most recent season. So there's this idea, oh, the fandom's dying, the fandom's dying, the fandom's dying. But there's also a period, hey, we look back at people who we thought were kind of a big important fandom and realize that, oh, someone like Draw Pony's Trace or someone like Toon Critic, not a nice guy. So we're looking back and analyzing all this stuff. Unofficial drama is just kind of spilling out of the woodworks, but this is also kind of a bright new era for a lot of new people. This is the jumping on point for a lot of new fans. In fact, a lot of fans who did not grow up during the previous periods don't know anything about Apple Dot Move or any of those memes like bananas and stuff like that.
Mom.
Yeah, well, whatever.
This is like the Pwn Pawn thing.
Whatever. So this is where we get a new wave of fans coming in, specifically the newer seasons and the My Little Pony movie bringing people kind of on board.
Yeah, for sure. It's so interesting to see how it's progressed so far. Just something that's interesting for me. So I'm 23 years old right now. When this show aired, I was 15. Like, I was just out of being 15. That's really, really weird, because for me, someone that, like, I got into this fandom at the same time that I was, like, entering adulthood. And so sometimes I think, like, how fucked up am I because of that? Or how different would things be if it had never happened? And so seeing the fandom age, I don't know, I kind of draw parallels between the fandom and myself, as if it's like myself as like a microcosm of what's happened in the community as a whole. Because a lot of us kind of are around that same age, right? Who was a minor when the show first started, right? Yeah. This show's been running for like nearly 8 years now. The first Everfree Northwest, I remember seeing we had all 3 voice actresses for the CMC. There was a photo posted like a year ago, I think, by Spike Firemane, where it was comparing the photo at Everfree 2012 with all 3 CMC with the photo from Everfree 2017 with all 3 CMC. They all grew like a foot. It's so bizarre to really think about how much time has actually passed. Yeah, seriously. But I you know, people talk about the fandom dying, and
it's not gonna die. It's going to, even when Gen 4 eventually, Gen 5 eventually comes around, and there's still be people who will obviously remain on board. It's happening with other fandoms, of course. Star Trek.
Every different iteration of Star Trek.
Yeah, every single fandom will kind of, and like I said, aside from the Star Trek fandom, no other fandom had such a hold on the convention scene as My Little Pony fandom. And
I think so, yeah.
All right. So with that, I think you guys know enough of the modern period that we would love to invite you to ask questions. So
or just bring up discussion points.
If you guys have questions or discussion points, feel free to line up at the microphone, and we will be taking Q&A until they kick us out.
Yes. Although I think because we started late, and I was told there's like 30 minutes between. We are cool to go a little bit over, right? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Right. Yeah, not even questions, even just if you got points to raise or anything you want to talk about, just let us know.
I got a few things to say before first off, I can't wait, as someone who's been going to Everfree since 2014, I can't wait to see what they do in next year. It's one of my favorite cons, very chill, very laid back, makes a lot of fun there, so good luck with you and everybody here.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
So where do you see the future of the fandom going? Also, what do you think is concerned to attend be dropping at Bronycon? Because this was like one time like over 10,000, now like this last year it was like down to 6,000. There was a lot of concern being made about that.
So that's a really good point. There's kind of two questions there, just future of the fandom in general and also future of cons like this one, because
That's where you can read my book.
yeah, right, yeah, plug this guy right here. But, so yeah, the biggest Bronycon we ever had was in 2015. We had 10,011 attendees. I remember that number exactly for some reason. And now over the last few years, it's dropped down a bit. And what, last year was like 6,000 something? I don't necessarily...
I have some theories, and I'll make a note about it in the book because that's the year where I kind of have to put an asterisk on Bronycon because it's such a far stretch because Everfree would
It's an outlier.
Would be the second largest con and doesn't even come a fraction, like 2-3 Everfrees doesn't even come close to what numbers Bronycon made that year. So it's kind of tricky, and I had some theories because that was also the year a cruise ship was in the city, so we might have a lot of just average people coming in, seeing what this is about, coming in for a day or so.
That seems a bit far.
But that was also the year that was heavily advertised. There's a lot of little things that they were doing that made it a bit bigger. But I'll explain a little bit more in the book when I have the data points there readily available. But I don't think that the fandom was dying. But one of the things I did predict a few years ago, back in 2013, I would say the natural progression of ponycons would to eventually form Western animation cons, and Western animation cons could not form on their own without the backing of the larger con. So Bronycon last year kind of shifted to the idea we'll welcome more things. Like that's why we did a Zootopia panel last year. TrotCons branching out to do Western animation as well, having things like Pokemon involved. So yeah, that's going to kind of be the future. Bronies will still be there, but it will just be kind of what the Star Trek community is today.
Yeah, just to add to that, kind of, I think, like we kind of brought up earlier, there was a con bubble. There was a few years in the middle, like 2012, there was a handful of big-ish pony cons that happened in the US, and they each had, more than 1,000 attendees, something like that. The next year, suddenly now there's like 20 cons. Next year, now there's like 40 or 50 or 60, all in the US.
Yeah, I remember that period.
And then suddenly it dropped again. And I remember at that time thinking, this is not sustainable, especially because we have one show. There's only a limited number of VIP guests that you can invite, you can't spread everyone. And now what's funny is,
I think that was one of the big points I was making back when I did a con tour.
you'll also notice that like as these cons go on, there's different VIPs being invited. It's like you'll see more like one-time appearance characters being invited, and that kind of thing.
Like Lee Topar for Christopher.
What I think, I would not say, I think that Bronycon being as large as it was in 2015, I don't think that was truly representative of how big the fandom in general was long term. I think much of that was something of a fluke, like you brought up the thing about the cruise ship thing, but also, I think where we're at now, with Bronycon, I think we've sort of found our equilibrium point.
So you say it will probably remain around 6,000-ish?
I don't expect it to drop massively as quickly as it has the past few years. I think we'll float around here for a bit and then we'll see where it goes. But
That's what happened with Everfree. Like for this year, last year, it was about stable.
yeah, I think so. So I'm not too worried about the future of the fandom. I'm sure it will decline past where it is now, but I don't necessarily view that as a bad thing. Like I said, I came of age during this fandom, and it'll always be a big, important part of my life. But I'm fine with it being,
All right,
Thank you.
Yeah.
That elevator right there, right?